Douglas Newkirk is a design director at Gensler in Shanghai. And since we've been hearing in the UK that the Chinese economy is back on track and that cities are getting back to normal, I thought it would be good to speak to him because I first interviewed him right at the beginning of the lockdown when China had just sort of emerged from the worst of the pandemic and we were just going into it. And I thought it'd be interesting to hear what life is like now that if the economy is coming back, cities are getting back to normal. So Douglas, is your life getting back to normal now?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I would say for the most part, 90 to 95%. Yeah, it's back to a pre-COVID sort of life. The biggest exception would very obviously be international travel. You know, going an entire year and not taking any travel, not taking any holidays outside of China is certainly the first time. In the 10 years that I've been living in Shanghai, it's the first year that I haven't taken a vacation. So this is the time where we explore the country that we're in and kind of find places that I haven't been to in China and just sort of take a week off and go to some of these places. So, but for the most part, it's fairly back to normal. Yeah.
And even your office, have you got longer term changes to the design of our office to avoid transmission of viruses, or is that also back to normal?
Well, we did in the beginning. I'm actually in the office now, and we did the first couple months, I would say 2 to 3 months when we were back in the office. We were doing certain things like wearing masks, especially in meetings, and we would limit the number of people that were in a meeting room. So if it was a 10-person meeting room, we would say 5 to 6 people, and then space them out. We had bottles of hand sanitizer throughout the office to encourage people to just very casually sanitize and wash their hands quite frequently. Actually, we still have that now. We're not wearing masks anymore in the office, but we do have the hand sanitizers. We are back to very normal meetings. We're not restricting number of people in meetings anymore. So, and the reason for most of that is because the government would track the number of cases in every city, where we could all see that on one of our mobile apps. And it's an app that we use in China called WeChat, or Alibaba's Alipay, which is essentially a social media app, but it also gives the sort of the numbers of coronavirus cases. And whether or not you could speculate whether it's true or not, but that was kind of the norm. We would check that, and as the numbers were getting reported down to essentially zero in Shanghai, whereas any cases in Shanghai would be imported, and they would be people that would come into the country, and then thus they are quarantined. So they're not really in the general mix of the city. So we slowly got back to a very normal working style. It was not mandatory to wear masks anymore. It was not mandatory to wear masks in the office buildings. However, public transportation, it is still mandatory. So if you take the metro, if you're taking a train, or if you're going to the airport, they do ask you to wear masks. And there's one other thing that we all have, which is a QR code. It's a health code, and it has a color green, yellow, or red. And obviously you can speculate if you're red, you're essentially tested positive. If you're green, you're good to go. So they do ask you when you enter certain businesses, certain office buildings may still be a bit more restrictive. Certainly airports and train stations, you do have to show that on your phone. So it's almost like showing your ID at that point. You know how to access it on your phone. It's updated all the time in real time. And if you were to go to a city where there is a spike in cases, or it is seen to be kind of a hot zone, your QR code may change to yellow, in which case you should be quarantined. That's probably those are the biggest changes.
But do you discern any, let's say, longer term shifts in living and working that might have implications on urban planning? Clearly, we're expecting here to be more home working for quite a long time. A lot of discussion about 15-minute neighborhoods as localism becomes more embedded. Are you seeing nervousness of busy spaces in cities, or any sort of shifts that might suggest that we change the way we plan cities?
Yeah, I think pre-COVID, we would do research at Gensler, kind of looking at this urbanization, and sort of every year tracking how our clients are moving, how cities are becoming more densely populated, how communities are being formed, because these are all opportunities for us to do urban planning, which is one of the services we do, designing architecture. So we were seeing a trajectory of about, I think by 2030, we were looking at about 45 cities in the world would have a population of over 10 million people. Currently, there's about 32, I think, 32 cities in the world that have over 10 million. So we would see kind of a 30% jump in that over the next 10 years, because we were seeing a trend towards urbanization, densification in cities. The trajectory is still kind of in that direction, but certainly if businesses do shift the way that we think they're going to shift, and the way that they're talking about shifting, especially in the West, in Europe, UK, and the US, we could see very, very easily a move towards kind of townification or suburbanization, and cities that are more sprawling, kind of like Los Angeles, versus that central downtown kind of vertical city like Manhattan being the other contrast. We do see that, but that would happen maybe only after it becomes a mainstream shift in working, where we're moving away from this centuries-year-old factory-like mentality of kind of managers watching when you're coming into the office, when you're leaving the office, how many hours you're putting in, and thus being a good employee if you're showing up to work at the right time and leaving late, and it means you're working hard. This is a very old way of sort of a culture of work, but many businesses still operate this way. If you're showing up to work late, managers are asking, okay, where are you? Why are you showing up not at the right time? So if this shift really does become the norm, where people are given the autonomy to show up to work at certain days or at certain hours, this could have very big implications on operational procedures. And this kind of mandatory attendance at the office becomes challenged. So things like certain perks in the workplace, like how many sick days you're allowed and how many paid days off you're allowed, would all get disrupted, because they essentially become irrelevant if you're allowed to work from home, and remote working is considered okay. So once that happens, then I think we could see families starting to move out where there are maybe better school districts, or getting the house with the space that you want. If you know that you're not you're not commuting into the office, into downtown every day, there are incentives to not necessarily have to be right next to the office. So I think the trend could move in that direction. I don't see it next year happening, but it may be something that we see in 5 years or so. But I think the businesses would have to adopt this mentality first. I think so.
So has your workload at Gensler's but the types of work you do changed at all as a result of COVID-19, or the same sorts of buildings are coming through as projects?
Yeah, I would say our local clients were predominantly unaffected by COVID. We only had about a 2-month disruption here in China, and where companies were back to work in April. So we were kind of closed down from February to April, and our local clients were moving forward with plans that they had. If companies were growing or expanding or shifting their workplace, or there were projects for new buildings, they essentially have moved forward. So there's very little disruption there, especially tech companies in China. Almost experienced no disruption to this. The work that they do is online. It's a lot of software work, so they could very easily work from home, and business continued for them. The biggest change that we see are international companies that we work with, where there were projects in the works, and their decision makers are a hybrid of leadership here in China and leadership abroad, being in Europe and the U.S. And the condition it is there in Europe and the States, um, those projects all went on hold, even though the projects were in China. Um, excuse me, the decision making power was stalled, because they were essentially closed. Those projects have now come back to life here in China recently. I think about August we saw a lot of those sort of life injected back into those, and as people became accustomed to working remotely, collaborating remotely, they just sort of accepted that, okay, well, we can work this way, and business needs to move on. Um, I would say one of the biggest changes, Peter, is we actually became more global in how we work because of this. Whereas previously, if we have work here in Shanghai, we would look to put together a team locally, because we're having face-to-face meetings with clients, and they want to see that our team is in China. But that's no longer as important. So we have people in Costa Rica, in the west coast of the U.S., in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, in India, in New York, that are working on projects here. And since they're all working from home, it really makes no difference whether you're in the same city or not, because you're at home and the office is closed. So it's everything's remote, and the only challenge you have to deal with is the time zones, which is not impossible to deal with. You just have a lot more evening and night calls and morning um, collaboration sessions, but it's not so difficult. And we've actually changed certain workflows that we do. If we know that half of my project team is here and the other half of my team is in the States, we work a certain way here, so that by the end of our day, we have something that we can communicate to them. We may do a call in the evening while we're eating dinner and they're waking up, just to kind of brief them on, here's the progress we've made today. And we've gotten more efficient with that, to the point where we only need about 30 minutes, and we can say, okay, here's what we need you to do. They go off and do it, and then they brief us on the reverse when we're waking up. So we've kind of learned a working style that way. We use online collaborative whiteboarding tools, to kind of help us. So it's interesting that we have been a lot more global. I would be working on projects in India and Taiwan and in the US, where you know, you just sort of look at the entire network of our company and see, okay, who's available and who has the experience, and clients don't worry about, oh, is that person here or not, because they're all in the same position.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, and glad some positives are coming out of this. And it's fairly staggering to hear you say, well, just 2 months of lockdown, as here in Europe, we find it very difficult to see that there is an end in sight at the moment. So, Doug, thank you very much for your insights. It's really interesting to compare what's happening in the two countries, and I hope you manage to get to the States soon.
I hope so too. Thank you, Peter.